Ernest Hemingway was a cat person, so much so that he left a trust for his cats in his will. Now, if you go to Key West, you will find that trust taking care of the descendants of Hemingway's original cats at the Hemingway House. The cats are allowed to roam free. If you stay at the small hotel on Duval Street that backs to the Hemingway House on Whitehead Street, the cats will be found climbing all over you, especially at mealtimes. Now, you can always tell a Hemingway cat. They are polydactyl, that is, they have 6 toes on each paw. Now, I've been a Hemingway fan ever since I was first forced to read a short story of his in grade school back in the 1960s. That story, A Day's Wait, was the one about the boy who thought he was going to die. He was used to the Celsius, not Fahrenheit systems, and when he heard his parents talking about his temperature, he spent the day waiting to die because he thought his fever was too high. Now, Mr. Brown assigned that story along with Lanigan versus the Ants. I remember Lanigan's story because was turned into the movie The Naked Jungle with Charlton Heston and Eleanor Parker. And as a teen, I had the biggest puppy love crush on that woman. But it wasn't until high school and The Sun Also Rises that my love affair with Hemingway really took off. Mr. Lovelace assigned that book and Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, back to back. Now, I was introduced to a lot of great writing back then, but no one held my attention as Hemingway did. I set out to read everything I could lay my hands on. Fortunately, the school's library had a treasure trove of Hemingway's works, biographies, critiques, and soon, if you were looking for me, you would find me sitting on the floor of the library's second landing, thumbing through a first edition of Death in the Afternoon. Now, with Hemingway came a love of all things Spanish. When I was 18, I got the chance to live out a major fantasy when Jose Greco invited me to Spain to spend the summer. It gave me the perfect chance to walk in Hemingway's shoes, so to speak. That was the summer of 1967. Now I have to skip ahead to the summer of 77. I was married and living in Chestertown, Maryland. James A. Michener was on the Eastern Shore. He was researching a new book. When it came out, it would be called, what else? Chesapeake. But it was Centennial that I had my eyes on. Now, Michener was signing books in the little bookstore in Churchill, Maryland. And that was about a quick car ride down the road, a couple of minutes, down Route 213 from where I lived. I figured it was the perfect way to get everyone I knew a great Christmas gift. So I packed my wife and kids in the car and hurried over to the bookstore to buy 13 copies of Centennial. That year, everyone on my Christmas list got a signed first edition of a James A. Michener book for the holidays. And what I thought was a great gift went over to the recipients like a pregnant pole vaulter. But I also took along my personal copies of Hawaii, Caravans, The Source, The Drifters, Bridges at Toko Ri, Tales of the South Pacific, and Iberia. I was hoping I could get him to sign them too, and he did. Now, meeting Michener was a real kick. He was sitting behind a small table in an equally small and unassuming bookstore, signing copies of his latest work. Now, there weren't many people in the store, so I waited my chance to step up to his table with both my arms and my wife's arms filled with copies of his books. He took one look at me and said, "Christmas?" Now, I smiled and answered. It seemed like a good idea. He laughed and we began talking. We had something in common. While in Spain, I had become friends with Andres Vasquez. Andres was the number 3 bullfighter ranked in Matador at the time. Michener also knew Andres. In fact, he devoted a whole chapter to him in Iberia. Now, at first, Michener thought I was, jerking his chain a bit. But as I recounted some of the adventures I had had with, accompanying Andres on the corrida circuit, he warmed up considerably. And then I told him that I, too, was a writer. I had just published my first book, Ram, The Campus Killings. Which, by the way, which I no longer own the rights to, which is why I rarely mention it. Now, Michener gave me his address and told me to send him a copy. I did, and for a while we became pen pals. Now, we lost touch when he was writing Texas. Not long ago, I posted a photograph of Michener's typewriter on Facebook and Twitter. I did it for sentimental reasons. I had received letters on it. Michener, in his letters to me, simply put in a piece of paper and began typing. No caps, virtually no punctuation, and no paragraphs. Just a solid block of words from one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. Now, in those letters, Michener told me about his connection to Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. Now, at the time, back in the 50s, Life magazine was a weekly photo news publication. According to Michener, Life editors wanted to add fiction to their format, so they contracted Ernest Hemingway for a short story. He sent them The Old Man and the Sea. According to Michener, Hemingway had had that story sitting in an old trunk. He had been saving it for a special occasion, and Life magazine seemed like the perfect venue for it. It was the last piece of literature that Hemingway published in his lifetime, kind of icing on the cake. Now, 2 years later, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now, the editors at Life read the story and were dumbfounded. They literally did not know what they had. Not sure what to do, they secretly sent a copy of the story to Michener, who was on assignment for the Saturday Evening Post in the Far East, writing a series of articles on the Korean War. Now, he said he read the galley proofs in a foxhole and reported to Life that they had a conundrum. The editors wanted to include fiction in Life. Hemingway had given them what was arguably one of the greatest pieces of literature written in the 20th century. If they published the story, they would be setting the bar of their fiction so high that no other writer would ever be able to come close, and their readers would be terribly disappointed. Well, on September 8th, 1952, they ignored Michener's advice and published the story and put Ernest Hemingway's photo on the cover. 35 cents. Now, I was in seventh heaven. Michener had just given me the inside scoop on my number one idol, kind of story that rarely makes it into print. Now, as a rabid fan, it doesn't get any better than that. Oh, by the way, the next writer they asked to contribute to the next Life literary issue was Michener, and he gave them Bridges of Toko-Ri. Now we have to skip ahead to the 1990s. Life had radically changed for me. I was divorced, living in Southbury, Connecticut, and working for a small regional newspaper as a sports writer / photographer. Early in 1990, I had a gallbladder operation that went south, and my pancreas ruptured. I spent a lot of time in the hospital, so much time that the morgue attendants had me on their soon-to-be-admitted pool at 9 to 5 odds against. Long story short, they were very disappointed when I didn't show up wrapped in a gray blanket. I didn't learn about the pool until well after I was out of the hospital, so I never got a chance to bet on myself. Now, when I was discharged from the hospital, I was literally half the man I used to be, having lost over 100 pounds. So to get back into, well, some semblance of shape, I bought a Trek 830 Antelope bicycle and began cycling. The paper had to hire another sports writer / photographer, but they kept me on as a feature writer and photographer, and I decided to cycle to all my assignments. Now, it was during that time that I got to meet and photograph people like, well, President Ronald Reagan, Vice President Bush, Senator Libby Dole, Senator then Governor Lowell Weicker, and others. I also picked up a bit of an unsavory reputation. The locals saw me on that trek so much that everyone thought that I had a drinking problem and that my driver's license had been revoked. Now, it's amazing how rumors start in a small town, and it's also amazing how hard it is to disprove them even when they see you behind the wheel of a car. Now, at the end of that particular cycling season, I checked my odometer and discovered that I had cycled over 1,500 miles. Hell, I thought, that's practically halfway across the country. And then it hit me. Why not go all the way? So that's just what I did. After spending all that time in the hospital, I figured, why put things off? You never know if the next day is going to be your last. So I saved up my money, bought a small walrus tent, and on one cold Easter Sunday morning, packed up my panniers and set off to see America. Now, I had just finished reading John McPhee's On Control of Nature, and there were things I wanted to see, like the dam that's been keeping the Mississippi River from changing course and joining with the Chafalaya, which it has been trying to do for the past 100 years or so. I also wanted to see at least a half a dozen Civil War battlefields, and my best friend from prep school who was living in New Orleans. So, with a severely edited copy of the Woodall Camping Directory tucked away in one of my panniers, I set out on my own personal cross-country odyssey. First target, the Delaware Water Gap. Then Havre de Grace, Maryland. Then Washington, D.C. and my grandfather's grave in Arlington National Cemetery. From there, to Front Royal, Virginia, and the Skyline Drive, then to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the Chickamauga battlefield, and then Mississippi and the route General Grierson took that was the inspiration for the John Wayne movie The Horse Soldiers. After that, New Orleans and the dam on the Mississippi. I was right on schedule until a spoke broke behind my freewheel cycling out of the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. I had to put my bike up for repairs and a general tune-up. Not that it mattered. I was in no rush to go anywhere fast. Now, it looked like I was going to be sidelined in Oklahoma City for about a week. There were all kinds of things I could do there, and I was planning to do until someone mentioned the Hemingway Days Festival in Key West, Florida. And I thought, why not? So, while my bicycle was in the shop, I put my gear in storage, packed a pannier full of clothes, and hopped a plane for Dallas, and then another to Miami, and rented a car for the final run to Key West. Now, it was a party city from practically the moment I parked the car. I did a lot of sightseeing and a lot of club soda drinking. Club soda. Pancreas injuries and alcohol do not go well together. Now, there were all kinds of lectures, book signings from several major authors, and a whole host of things to do. I mean, it was Key West, for crying out loud. Word soon got around that I was in the process of cycling across the country. People asked me all kinds of questions. Most of them centered on, wasn't it dangerous thing to do, cycling all alone across the country? Now, I had never considered it dangerous, but obviously a lot of people did. Then one night I attended the storytelling contest, and I was half badgered, half cajoled into telling one. I told a ghost story that actually happened to me while at college, and it surprised the hell out of me when I won and got into the finals. Then it surprised the hell out of me even more when I won that too. I told a story about getting gored at a fighting bull breeding farm in Spain. It really didn't happen, but I have a nasty scar on my leg, and with some borrowed lipstick to heighten and light it up a little bit, people thought it was the honest truth. And the funny thing about it was that the storytelling contest wasn't even in Ernest Hemingway's honor, but his brother's, Lester. Lester Hemingway was Ernest's younger brother. He kind of falls through the cracks in history because of the fame of his older brother, but he was a writer in his own right and achieved some notoriety with the biography of his brother. There were 3 contests associated with the festival: a writing contest in honor of Ernest, a look-alike contest independently run by Sloppy Joe's Bar, and the storytelling contest in honor of Lester. Why Lester and not Ernest? Well, while Ernest was locked away in his garret room on his estate writing, Lester was out making friends. Of the two, he appears to have been the more gregarious. He was also described as the kind of man who could walk into a strange bar crowded with people and quietly begin to tell the bartender a story, and within minutes have everyone silent and listening to him. Apparently, the man had a unique, compelling quality to his voice and was one hell of a raconteur. Now, one of the prizes for winning the storytelling contest was a one-on-one with the Hemingway family at the Hemingway house, dinner and drinks, if I remember correctly. There, I got to meet members from Ernest's side of the family and members from Lester's side of the family. His wife, Doris Hemingway, Lester's daughters, Hilary and Anne Fure Hemingway, or Anne Hemingway Fure, an artist who donated several pieces of autographed stained glass work as storytelling prizes. Hilary's husband, Jeff Lindsay, was also there. Jeff acted as the MC for the storytelling contest. Dexter was still an embryo in his deviously creative mind. Needless to say, I was in seventh heaven. Now, I was sitting in my idol's house in one of his chairs, meeting members of his family and his brother's family and playing with his cats. Now, I'm not normally a cat person, but some of his felines remembered me from the hotel and were climbing all over my lap and rubbing against my legs looking for a handout from Mr. Soft Touch. When Lester's wife walked over, now Doris came by, paused in front of me and said, "Eric, do you know you look more like Ernest did when he lived here than any of the old men trying to look like him down at Sloppy Joe's? They're trying to look like Papa Hemingway. When Ernest lived here, he was still the youngish big game hunter deep sea fisherman, not the old man in the Karsh portrait." I was stunned. I thanked her for the compliment, and the next day ran down to Sloppy Joe's and bought one of the t-shirts with the younger Hemingway featured on it and wore it for the next 12 years. It's no longer available, but then I look more like Papa Hemingway now than I do the younger Hemingway version. When the week was over, I was told that I would have to return next year to defend my storytelling title. I promised I would. Now, back in Oklahoma City, I picked up my trek and continued cycling west. I had to photograph a bench at a nursing home in Shattuck, Oklahoma. There was also a photograph of a tree that was planted to honor the only tree that in the Llano Escatado, which is the flattest land on the face of the earth. And eventually I wanted to cycle the back half of Route 66 into Pasadena, California. However, my one and only regret on that trip is I didn't have someone take my picture standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. But the story doesn't end there. I got to play with Hemingway's cats 2 more times. The next year, I went back to Key West to defend my storytelling contest, and despite the ribbing I took from Hillary and Jeff about having driven down and not cycled, I won again. That in turn prompted another trip to Key West to defend my 2-time winning storytelling title. Only on the third time, I cycled down to Key West from Connecticut. Now, I didn't win that year, but it didn't matter. The Lester Hemingway connection was worth its weight in memory gold. I had a great tan from all the cycling, and then there were the cats.